She lost her home in silence, then bought a $10 ruin until her dog found something no one else saw. The lock had already been changed by the time Lydia reached the porch. Her life, packed into plastic bins, waited where she used to stand every morning with her coffee. No argument, no explanation. Just over. By nightfall, she was heading into the mountains with nowhere left to go, except a collapsing mill no one wanted, and a dog who refused to ignore one spot on the floor. If you were in her place, would you walk away or follow what your gut and your dog kept pointing you toward? Lydia Mercer knew something was wrong before she even reached the porch. It was the way the bins were lined up. 3 plastic containers, gray lids, neatly stacked beside the steps like someone had taken time with them. Too much time. Not the kind of thing you do in a hurry. Not the kind of thing you do if you expect the person to come back inside. She stopped at the edge of the walkway. The late afternoon light stretched long across the yard, catching on the edges of the bins, the chipped railing, the small patch of grass she used to keep trimmed every Sunday morning. Everything looked the same, except it wasn't. Bruno moved first. He stepped in front of her without being told, his body angled slightly toward the house. Not aggressive, just alert. His ears lifted, his tail lowered, steady, but not tucked. Watching. Lydia took another step forward. The front door was closed. That was normal. The lock wasn't. It was new. Bright brass. Clean. No scratches around the keyhole. No fading from weather. She stood there for a moment, holding her breath without realizing it. Then she reached into her coat pocket. The key was still there. Same one she'd used for years, worn smooth at the edges. She slid it into the lock. It didn't fit. She tried again. Slower this time. Pressing harder, as if the metal might give if she insisted enough. It didn't. Behind her, a car passed slowly down the street, not stopping, just passing. Lydia pulled the key out and stared at it. Bruno shifted closer, his shoulder brushing against her leg. She felt the warmth of him through the fabric of her coat. Solid, present. Inside the house, something flickered. The television. She could hear it faintly through the door. A laugh track, applause, bright and cheerful in a way that didn't belong. She knocked. Not hard. Just enough. No answer. She waited. Counted to 5 in her head. Then 10. Still nothing. Across the street, a curtain moved. Just a little. Then it stilled again. Lydia turned slowly, taking in the quiet neighborhood, the same houses, the same trimmed hedges, the same place she had walked through every day for years without thinking about it. Now it felt different. Like she didn't belong in it anymore. She looked back at the bins. One of them had been labeled with a piece of masking tape, her name written in thick black marker. Lydia Mercer. She stepped down from the porch and lifted the lid. Inside, folded clothes, a sweater she recognized immediately, pale blue, the one she wore when it got cold in the evenings. Beneath it, a stack of dish towels, a photo frame turned face down. She didn't pick it up, didn't want to see which photo they had chosen to pack. Bruno lowered his head slightly, sniffing along the edge of the bin. Then he lifted it again, scanning the street, watching. Always watching. Lydia closed the lid gently. Her hands were steady. That surprised her. She moved to the next bin. Kitchen things this time. utensils wrapped in newspaper, a chipped mug, the one with the faded green stripe near the rim. She remembered buying it at a roadside shop years ago. Couldn't remember exactly when, just that it had felt like something small and nice at the time. She set the lid back in place. The third bin was heavier. Books, papers, old envelopes bundled with a rubber band that had dried and snapped. She didn't open those. Didn't need to. She already knew what they were. Behind her, Bruno let out a low breath. Not a growl, just air moving through his chest. Lydia reached down and rested her hand on the back of his neck. His fur was thick, warm, familiar. He leaned into her touch for just a second, then straightened again. Still watching the door, still waiting for something that wasn't coming. Lydia looked at the house one more time. The windows reflected the sky, pale and empty. No movement inside, no shadow passing by. Just the television sound leaking faintly through the walls. She thought about knocking again, calling out. But the thought passed as quickly as it came. Instead, she turned. Not fast, not dramatic, just turned. She picked up the first bin. It was lighter than it looked. Bruno stepped beside her immediately, matching her pace as they moved down the walkway. His body stayed close, just slightly ahead, as if clearing the path. At the curb, she set the bin down and went back for the second, then the third. 3 trips, no rush. When she was done, she stood there for a moment, looking at the small pile of what was left of her life. 3 bins, that was all. The street stayed quiet. The curtain across the road didn't move again. Lydia adjusted her grip on the handle of the top bin. "Come on," she said softly. Bruno didn't hesitate. They walked away from the house together. No one called after them. No one opened the door. The television kept playing. And the new lock caught the last of the sunlight, shining just a little too bright. Lydia didn't look back again. By the time the sun dipped below the rooftops, she and Bruno were 2 blocks away, then 3. The bins grew heavier with each step, not because they weighed more, but because there was nowhere clear to take them. She stopped at a bus bench near the edge of the highway, the kind with peeling paint and a schedule no one really followed. Cars rushed past, wind tugging at her coat, carrying the smell of asphalt and distant exhaust. Bruno sat beside her, not lying down, alert. His eyes moved with every passing vehicle, then back to her, then to the bins. Waiting. Lydia rested her hands on the lid of the top container. She could feel the faint warmth left over from the day's heat trapped inside the plastic. It would get cold soon. She knew that without checking. A man in a reflective vest walked past, glanced once at the bins, then kept moving. No questions. No pause. That seemed to be how things worked now. People saw just enough, and then chose not to. A bus came eventually. Not the one she expected, but one that stopped anyway. The driver opened the door with a soft hiss and leaned slightly out. "You getting on?" Lydia hesitated. Then she nodded. It took time to lift the bins, one at a time, up the narrow steps. The driver didn't rush her, didn't help either. Just watched, patient in a distant way. Bruno stepped up last, placing each paw carefully, then turned once inside the aisle, scanning before settling near her seat. The bus smelled faintly of rubber and old fabric. A low hum ran through the floor as it pulled away. Lydia sat by the window. The neighborhood slipped past, then the familiar streets, then the ones she didn't recognize as well. She didn't track the route, didn't need to. Anywhere was somewhere else. The motel sat just off the highway, tucked behind a gas station, with a flickering sign that buzzed softly in the evening air. Vacancy glowed in uneven red letters. The office was small. Glass window. Bell on the counter. Lydia pressed it once. A man appeared from the back, wiping his hands on a rag. He looked at her, then at Bruno, then at the bins stacked just outside the door. "How many nights?" "Just a week," Lydia said. Her voice sounded steady, even to her. He nodded, named a price. Cash. She counted the bills carefully. The numbers didn't leave much room for mistakes. The key he handed her was attached to a heavy plastic tag, faded blue, the number scratched slightly at the edges. Room 12. The room smelled like detergent that never quite covered what came before it. There was a bed, a small table, a television mounted high in the corner. The carpet carried a faint pattern worn thin by years of footsteps. Lydia set the bins down near the wall. Bruno entered slowly, nose low, mapping the room in quiet passes. Door, window, bathroom, corners. He paused at the door, sniffed along the bottom seam, then moved to the window, pushing his nose lightly against the curtain before stepping back. Satisfied. For now. Lydia sat on the edge of the bed. It creaked under her weight, a small shift in the frame. The mattress dipped more than it should. She didn't lie down. Not yet. Outside, a truck engine idled for a long moment, then shut off. Doors slammed somewhere nearby. Voices rose briefly, then faded. Bruno circled once, then lay down near the door. Not beside her. Near the door. His head stayed up. Ears moving. Tracking. The television turned on with a click when she pressed the remote. Bright light filled the room. Too bright. The volume was louder than expected. She lowered it. Left it on. Not for watching. Just for sound. That night didn't settle. It stretched. Every time Lydia closed her eyes, something pulled her back up. A footstep outside. A car door. The hum of the ice machine down the walkway, rattling unevenly like it was working harder than it should. Bruno never fully slept. He shifted positions quietly. Stood once. Walked to the door. Waited. Then returned to his spot. Each time his movements were deliberate, measured, like he was holding something together. Lydia turned onto her side, facing the wall. The paint there had a small crack running through it, branching into thinner lines. She followed it with her eyes in the dim light. She didn't think about the house. Not directly. But it was there anyway. In the silence between sounds. In the way her hands stayed folded, as if waiting for something to do. Morning came without feeling like it had. A pale gray light filtered through the curtains, the kind that didn't fully wake a room. Lydia sat up slowly. Her back ached. Not sharply, just enough to remind her she wasn't used to this. Bruno was already up, standing at the window, watching. When she moved, he turned immediately, his posture shifting, alert softening just slightly. She reached for one of the bins and opened it. Clothes. She picked out a sweater, different from the one she'd seen before. This one darker, thicker. Something practical. In the bathroom, the mirror showed her face in pieces. The light above it flickered once before settling. She washed her hands. The water ran cold before warming slowly. Routine. Even here. Later that morning, she walked to the county office. It wasn't far. A low building with a faded sign and a parking lot that had more empty spaces than full ones. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and dust. People moved slowly. Quiet conversations. The shuffle of forms being handled. Lydia stood near the counter, waiting her turn. Behind her, Bruno stood close, not touching, but near enough that she could feel him without looking. Two clerks spoke to each other in low voices. Still on the list? Yeah. Nobody wants it. What's it at now? $10. A pause. Still too much. A soft laugh. Lydia didn't move, didn't turn, but she listened. Where is it again? Up past the old forest line. Old mill place, creek runs under it, been empty forever. Unsafe? Probably. No road anyway. You'd have to walk in. Another pause. Good luck selling that. Lydia stepped forward when the line moved, but the words stayed with her. $10. A place no one wanted. A place no one would bother with. She rested her hand lightly against Bruno's neck. He didn't move, just stood there, waiting. The way he always did. And for the first time since the lock had changed, something in Lydia shifted. Not relief. Not yet. But something quieter. Like a door inside her had opened just enough to let a thought in. A place no one would bother with. She looked at the counter ahead and didn't step away. The line moved once more. A man in a faded jacket finished his paperwork and stepped aside. The clerk behind the counter glanced up, already reaching for the next form. Next. Lydia stepped forward. The countertop was worn smooth in places where hands had rested for years. There were faint scratches near the edge, a ring stain from a coffee cup that had never fully cleaned off. "What can I help you with?" the clerk asked, not unkindly, just practiced. Lydia paused. Her fingers rested lightly against the surface. She could feel the coolness of it through her skin. "The property you mentioned," she said. "The one up past the forest line." The clerk's eyes flicked up, just briefly. "The mill?" Lydia nodded. A small shift in the man's expression. Not surprise exactly. More like recognition of something he'd expected no one to follow through on. "That one's been sitting for years," he said. "Tax sale. Nobody's bid on it. I heard it was $10. "That's right." He leaned back slightly in his chair, studying her a little more closely now. Not in a suspicious way, just measuring. "You been out there before?" "No. It's not easy to get to." "I understand. No road past the service gate. Last stretch is on foot. 2 miles, maybe a little more depending on the trail you take." He spoke slowly, like he'd said this before. "There's no utilities, no electric, no running water. Structures, questionable." He tapped a file on the desk beside him. County tried to condemn it twice. Never followed through. Too far out. Not worth the effort. Lydia listened without interrupting. Behind her, Bruno stood still, not restless, not tense, just present. The clerk glanced at him once. "You planning to live there?" Lydia didn't answer right away. She looked down at her hands, then back up. "I'm planning to go there." That seemed to be enough. The clerk nodded once, then reached for a folder. Papers slid free with a soft sound. He turned them toward her, pointing where needed. "Name here, initial here, signature at the bottom." The pen felt heavier than it should. Lydia held it for a moment before writing. Her name came out steady. No hesitation in the letters. Lydia Mercer. The clerk watched, then turned the paper back toward himself. He checked it quickly, stamped it once with a firm motion, then set it aside. "That'll do it," he said. Lydia reached into her coat pocket. The bill was folded twice, worn at the edges. She smoothed it lightly against the counter before placing it down. $10. The clerk picked it up, glanced at it, then tucked it into the drawer without comment. He reached beneath the counter and pulled out a small envelope. "Deed copies in here. Map too, though it's rough." He slid it across. "You'll want to follow the service road until it ends. There's a trailhead sign. From there, it's just the creek path." "Is it marked?" "Not really." He paused, then added, "You'll hear the water before you see it. Just keep it on your left going in." Lydia nodded. She picked up the envelope. It felt light. Lighter than it should, considering what it represented. Behind her, someone shifted in line. A quiet cough. The shuffle of boots on the floor. Lydia stepped aside. "Good luck," the clerk said, not loudly. She didn't turn back, but she heard it. Outside, the air felt different. Not warmer, not cooler, just different. Lydia stood on the steps of the building for a moment, the envelope held loosely in her hand. Bruno moved beside her, scanning the parking lot, then the road beyond. A car door slammed somewhere. A radio played faintly from an open window. Everything continued. Nothing had changed. And yet, she looked down at the envelope again. A place. Not a room. Not a borrowed space. Something that didn't belong to anyone else. A truck pulled into the lot then, older model, paint faded unevenly along the sides. It rolled to a stop near the curb. The driver leaned out. "You heading toward the service road?" he asked. Lydia looked up. The man was older, late 60s maybe, weathered face, cap pulled low. There was no urgency in his voice. "Just a question." "I am," Lydia said. He nodded once. "I can get you part of the way, not all the way, but closer than this." Lydia hesitated. Not long. Then she nodded. "Thank you." The man stepped out and opened the truck bed. They loaded the bins together. No conversation while they did it. Just the quiet sound of plastic against metal, the scrape of weight shifting. Bruno watched the man carefully the entire time. Not aggressive, just aware. When Lydia climbed into the passenger seat, Bruno followed without needing to be told, settling at her feet after a brief scan of the cab. The engine turned over with a low, steady rumble. They pulled out onto the road. For a while, neither of them spoke. The town slipped past in small pieces. Storefronts, gas stations, a diner with a half-lit sign. Then the buildings thinned. The road narrowed. Trees began to close in on either side. The man kept his eyes on the road. "You sure about this?" he asked finally. Lydia looked out the window. The forest stretched deeper ahead, shadows gathering between the trunks. "No," she said. The man nodded, like that was the right answer. "That's about how it goes." They drove on. The pavement gave way to gravel with a soft crunch beneath the tires. The truck slowed slightly as the road curved upward. The air coming through the window smelled different now. Damp, green. Somewhere ahead, faint but steady, there was the sound of water. Bruno lifted his head. Ears forward. Listening. Lydia heard it too. Not clearly, but enough. They drove until the road narrowed again, then ended in a wide, uneven clearing. The man pulled the truck to a stop. "This is as far as it goes," he said. Lydia nodded. She stepped out, the ground shifting slightly under her feet as gravel gave way to packed dirt. The bins came down one by one. The man closed the tailgate with a firm push. He didn't offer advice, didn't warn her again, just gave a small nod. "You'll find it," he said. Then he got back into the truck. The engine started. The sound faded as he drove away. Lydia stood there for a moment. The clearing was quiet. The kind of quiet that wasn't empty, just full of smaller sounds. Wind in the trees, leaves shifting, and beneath it all, the creek. Bruno stepped forward, nose low, then lifted his head, looking toward the narrow trail that disappeared into the woods. He didn't look back. Lydia picked up the first bin, adjusted her grip, then followed. The trail didn't look like much at first, just a narrow break in the trees, packed dirt, scattered leaves, a few exposed roots twisting across the ground like something half buried and still growing. Bruno moved ahead without hesitation. Not far, just enough. He kept a steady distance, stopping every so often to glance back at her, making sure she was still there before continuing. Lydia shifted the weight of the bin in her hands and stepped onto the path. The air changed almost immediately. Cooler, damp, the kind of air that held on to the smell of things, earth, bark, water moving somewhere out of sight. She could hear it now. The creek. Faint at first, just a suggestion beneath the quiet. Then clearer as she moved deeper in. A constant sound. Not loud, not rushing, just steady. The trail narrowed as it went. Branches leaned in from both sides, brushing lightly against her coat. Leaves clung to the fabric, then slipped away as she walked. The ground wasn't even. She had to watch where she placed her feet. Step over roots, around stones slick with moss. The bin made it harder, shifted her balance just enough to keep her aware of every movement. Bruno adapted without thinking. His pace slowed when hers did, quickened when the ground leveled out. His ears stayed forward, catching sounds she didn't notice. Once he stopped completely, head tilted. Listening. Lydia paused behind him, catching her breath. "What is it?" she asked quietly. Bruno didn't answer, of course. He never did. But after a moment, he moved again. Whatever he had heard, whatever had held his attention, passed. They continued. It took longer than she expected. Not just the distance, the effort. The trail climbed in places without warning. A slow incline that didn't look steep until she was halfway up it. Her breathing heavier, the bin pressing into her fingers. She set it down once just for a moment. The silence settled around her quickly when she stopped moving. The creek louder now, running somewhere just beyond the trees to her left. Bruno stayed standing, watching the path behind them. Then the one ahead. Always both. Lydia rolled her shoulders, flexed her hands, then picked the bin up again. "Not far," she said. She didn't know if that was true, but she said it anyway. The light changed as they went deeper. What had been open sky at the edge of the clearing turned into filtered green, the sun breaking through layers of leaves overhead. Shadows moved with the wind. Soft, shifting. At one point, the trail dipped closer to the creek. Lydia caught her first clear glimpse of it. Water moving over smooth stones, clear enough to see the bottom. The sound matched what she'd been hearing all along, quiet but constant. She stopped again, not because she had to, just to look. Bruno stepped closer to the edge, sniffing the air above the water, then pulling back without stepping in. Cautious, respectful. Lydia watched him for a moment, then turned back to the trail. The second trip was harder. She left the first bin just off the path where the trees opened slightly, marking the spot in her mind. Then she walked back for the others. The distance felt longer the second time, her legs heavier, the ground less forgiving. But she didn't rush. There was no one waiting, no one expecting her, just the path and the sound of the creek. By the time she carried the last bin to where the others rested, the light had shifted again. Lower now, warmer. The forest seemed to deepen with it. Bruno stayed close during the last stretch. Not ahead this time. Beside her. His shoulder brushing her leg now and then as they walked. The mill revealed itself slowly. Not all at once. A shape between the trees. Something that didn't belong to the forest, but had been there long enough that the forest had learned to grow around it. Lydia saw the roofline first. Crooked. Edges uneven where sections had sagged or slipped. Then the stone. Darkened with age. Streaked with green where moss had taken hold. The closer she got, the more it came into view. A structure straddling the creek. Not beside it. Over it. The water disappeared beneath one side and re-emerged on the other, the sound shifting slightly as it passed through. Bruno stopped. Not abruptly. Just stopped. His body went still. Ears forward. Eyes fixed. Lydia followed his gaze. The mill stood in front of them now, fully visible. 2 stories, barely. The upper level leaned just enough to notice if you looked for it. Wood panels weathered gray, some missing entirely. A wheel on the side, once part of something functional, now frozen in place, broken paddles hanging at uneven angles. The door hung slightly open. Not inviting. Just not closed. Lydia took a few steps closer. The ground near the entrance was softer, worn by water and time. She set the bin down slowly, looked up at the structure. It didn't feel abandoned in the way empty houses in town did. It felt paused, like something that had been left mid-sentence. Bruno moved again, slowly. He approached the doorway first, nose low, reading the air. The ground, the wood. He paused at the threshold, then stepped inside. Lydia stood just outside for a moment longer. The creek moved beneath her feet, the sound rising through the boards and stone. She could feel it faintly, a vibration more than a sound. She took a breath, then followed him in. The air inside the mill was cooler than outside, not fresh, not stale either, just still, like it had been waiting. Her first step landed on wood that answered back with a long, quiet creak. The sound carried farther than she expected, echoing lightly through the space, then fading into the steady murmur of the creek beneath. She paused, listened. Nothing else moved. Bruno had already crossed the room. He didn't rush. He didn't wander aimlessly. He moved with intention, nose low, tracing lines along the floor, along the walls, along the edges where dust had settled undisturbed for years. The lower level opened wide around them. Stone walls, darkened with age and dampness, rose on either side. The ceiling beams above were thick, rough cut, still holding their shape despite everything. In the center of the room, remnants of something mechanical. Old gears, splintered wood, iron rods sat frozen in place like a machine that had simply stopped. The smell was faint. Old wood, cold stone, and something metallic beneath it all. Lydia stepped further inside. The door shifted slightly behind her with the breeze, tapping once against the frame. The sound made her turn. Then she faced forward again. "This will do," she said quietly. Her voice didn't fill the space the way she expected. It stayed close to her, almost like the room absorbed it. Bruno moved toward the back wall, then circled back, his path looping naturally, as if mapping the room from memory. He passed her once, brushing lightly against her leg, then continued. He didn't settle. Not yet. A staircase stood in the far corner. Narrow, steep. The wood worn smooth along the center, where feet had once passed up and down, day after day. Lydia set one hand on the railing. It shifted slightly under her weight, but held. She tested the first step, then the second. Each one creaked in its own voice, some high, some low, but none gave way. At the top, the space opened into a single room. Light filtered in through broken sections of the wall and a window frame missing most of its glass. It painted the floor in uneven shapes, pale and green-tinted from the trees outside. The boards beneath her feet were uneven. Some bowed slightly, others held firm. The air up here carried less dampness, more dust. Lydia walked slowly across the room, her eyes adjusting to the dimness. A fireplace stood along one wall, stone, blackened with soot that had settled deep into the surface. The opening wide enough for a proper fire once, though now it was filled with ash hardened by time. A table sat near the window, one leg slightly shorter than the others, causing it to tilt just enough to notice. A chair beside it, still upright, still intact. She set her hand on the back of the chair. It didn't wobble. "That's something," she murmured. Behind her, Bruno reached the top of the stairs. His presence filled the space more than the light did. He stepped into the room and stopped, completely still. Lydia turned slightly, watching him. His posture had changed. Not tense, not afraid. Focused. His ears angled forward, his head lowering just slightly as he moved toward the far side of the room, toward the fireplace. Lydia followed at a distance. Bruno circled once, then again. Slower the second time. His nose traced along the floorboards near the base of the stone hearth. He paused, sniffed longer in one spot, then shifted a few inches and did the same. Lydia watched him carefully now. "What is it?" she asked. He didn't respond. He never did. But his behavior, that was something she understood. He wasn't restless. He wasn't reacting to something passing through. He was searching, deliberate. She stepped closer. The floor near the fireplace didn't look different at first glance. Same worn boards, same darkened grain, but when she stepped on one, it gave slightly under her weight. Not enough to feel unstable, just enough to notice. She shifted her foot, pressed again. The board moved. Not loose, not exactly, just not fixed the way the others were. Bruno lowered his head further, nose nearly touching the seam between two planks. He inhaled slowly, then lifted his head just a fraction, eyes still locked on the spot. Waiting. Lydia crouched. Her knees protested slightly as she lowered herself to the floor, one hand bracing against the wood. She pressed her fingers along the edge of the board. Dust gathered at the seams, but less here than in other places. She noticed that. faint lines where the wood had been disturbed at some point. Not recently, but not untouched either. She sat back slightly. Later, she said under her breath. Bruno didn't move. He remained there, standing over the spot, as if it held something important. Lydia pushed herself up slowly. The room felt different now. Not because of what she saw, but because of what she didn't understand yet. She turned away and moved toward the window. The glass that remained was clouded, but enough light came through to see the trees beyond. Tall, close, the forest pressing in on all sides, no neighbors, no roads. Just this. Below, the creek moved steadily beneath the structure, its sound rising through the floor in a constant rhythm. Lydia exhaled. She set one of the bins down near the wall and opened it. Clothes. A blanket. She pulled the blanket free and shook it out once. Dust lifted into the air, catching the light before settling again. She laid it across the floor near the far corner, away from the fireplace. Away from the spot Bruno refused to leave. He didn't follow her. He stayed exactly where he was. Eyes down. Focused. Waiting. Lydia watched him for a moment longer. Then she turned back to her small space. The wind moved faintly through the gaps in the wall, carrying the scent of the creek and something colder beneath it. The mill shifted once, quietly, as if adjusting to her presence. And for the first time since she stepped inside, it didn't feel empty. It felt like it was watching back. Lydia didn't move for a while. She stood near the window, the blanket still half folded in her hands, listening to the low, steady sound of water beneath the floor. The mill held that sound differently inside. It wasn't just something you heard. It was something you felt, faint, constant, like a pulse moving through the structure. Behind her, Bruno shifted. Not much, just enough to remind her he was still there. Still in the same place, still focused on the same spot. She turned slowly. He hadn't left the area near the fireplace, not even to explore the rest of the room. His nose hovered just above the boards, then lifted slightly, then lowered again, repeating the motion with careful precision. It wasn't restless behavior. It was repetition. Deliberate. Lydia watched him longer this time. "How long are you going to stay there?" she asked quietly. Bruno didn't respond. He just pressed one paw forward, lightly touching the edge of the same board she had noticed earlier. Not scratching, not digging. Just placing it there. Then pulling it back. Waiting. Lydia set the blanket down. She walked toward him, slower now. Not cautious, just aware. The boards beneath her feet creaked in uneven tones, but when she stepped near the fireplace, something changed. The sound. It wasn't as solid. She paused, shifted her weight, pressed down slightly. The board gave again. Just enough. She stepped off, then back on. The difference was subtle. Most people wouldn't notice it. But Lydia had spent years noticing things that didn't quite match what they should be. Changes in tone, in rhythm, in silence. She crouched again. Her knees lowered carefully this time, her hand bracing against the floor. Bruno stepped back half a pace, giving her space, but his eyes never left the spot. Lydia ran her fingers along the seam between the planks. Dust gathered there, but thinner than the rest of the room. She pressed lightly. The board shifted. A fraction. Not loose enough to lift, but not fixed in place either. She sat back slightly, considering. The room was quiet, except for the creak. No wind now, no movement outside, just the steady sound beneath everything. Bruno let out a slow breath. Not tension, just patience. He lowered himself to the floor, but not fully. His front legs stretched forward, body angled toward the same section of wood, head resting just above his paws. Still watching. Still waiting. Lydia leaned forward again. She pressed harder this time. The board dipped, then settled. She moved her hand a few inches to the side. Another board, solid, back again. The first one shifted. She traced the outline with her fingers. Not just one plank, two, side by side. Both slightly different from the rest. She tapped lightly with her knuckles. A dull sound, then a hollow one. She paused, tapped again. There it was. A difference in tone. Small, but clear. Lydia sat back slowly. Her breath came out longer than she expected. She glanced around the room as if something might have changed while she wasn't looking. But everything stayed the same. The table, the chair, the pale light coming through the broken window. Only now, the room felt less still, less silent, like it was holding something. She pushed herself up and walked back toward the stairs. "Let's leave it," she said, more to herself than to Bruno. Her voice didn't sound certain. Bruno didn't follow. He remained where he was. Lydia stopped at the top of the stairs and turned back. He hadn't moved. Still facing the boards, still waiting. She sighed quietly, then walked down to the lower level. The air below felt heavier, cooler. The sound of the creak louder now, echoing through the stone and wood. Lydia moved through the space slowly, looking for anything useful. There wasn't much. A rusted tool leaned against the wall. Broken wood from the old mechanism. Dust layered over everything. She found a length of metal near the back. Not quite a crowbar, but close enough. Heavy. Solid. She lifted it, testing the weight. It would do. When she turned back toward the stairs, she paused. Listened. Nothing had changed above. No sudden noise. No movement. Just the same quiet. She climbed carefully, one hand gripping the railing, the other holding the metal bar. Each step creaked under her weight, but held. At the top, Bruno was exactly where she left him. He lifted his head when she appeared. His tail moved once, not excited, not relieved, just acknowledging. She walked toward him. The bar felt heavier now, not physically, just in what it meant. She stopped beside the boards, looked down. "This might be nothing," she said softly. Bruno watched her. Didn't move. Lydia crouched again. She slid the edge of the metal bar into the seam between the planks. It didn't go in easily. She adjusted the angle, pressed harder. The wood resisted, then gave slightly. A small shift. She stopped, waited. Nothing happened. No collapse, no crack, just the faint movement of wood against wood. Bruno leaned forward slightly, not interfering, just closer. Lydia adjusted her grip, pressed again. The board lifted a fraction of an inch, then settled back. She exhaled slowly. "Not tonight," she murmured. She pulled the bar free and set it down beside her. The boards fell back into place with a soft, hollow sound. Bruno didn't relax. He stayed focused, but he didn't push further either. Lydia stood. Her legs felt stiff now. The room seemed darker than before, though the light hadn't changed much. Or maybe it had. Time moved differently out here. She picked up the blanket again and spread it across the corner she had chosen earlier. Far enough from the fireplace. Far enough from the boards. She sat down, then lay back slowly, staring up at the ceiling beams above. Bruno remained where he was for a long moment. Then, finally, he turned, walked over, and lay down beside her. But not fully. His body stayed angled slightly toward the fireplace, as if part of him was still there, still listening, still waiting. Lydia closed her eyes. The creek moved beneath them, steady, unchanging. And somewhere between that sound and the quiet weight of the room, something had shifted. Not outside, not yet, but inside the floor, inside the space, and inside the way she was beginning to see it. Lydia didn't sleep deeply. The night came in layers. Cold settling through the gaps in the walls, the slow shifting of wood as the temperature dropped, the creek below, never stopping, never changing its rhythm. She turned once, then again. Each time Bruno lifted his head. Not fully awake, but never fully asleep either. Sometime before morning, Lydia opened her eyes and stared into the dim outline of the room. The light hadn't returned yet, but the darkness had softened enough to make shapes. The fireplace, the table, and beyond them, that section of floor. It was still there. Still exactly where it had been, but it didn't feel the same now. Not just part of the room, something else. Bruno was already watching it. He hadn't moved far from where he'd been. His body was closer to hers, but his attention remained fixed in the same direction. Lydia pushed herself up slowly. Her joints resisted at first, then gave way. She sat there for a moment, listening. The morning came quietly out here. No traffic, no distant voices, just the slow rise of light through the trees and the steady sound of water beneath the mill. Bruno stood, stretched once, long and deliberate, then walked straight back to the fireplace. No hesitation, no searching, straight to the same spot. Lydia watched him go. "Well," she said softly, "I suppose we're not ignoring it anymore." She reached for the metal bar where she had left it. It felt colder now, heavier, not because it had changed, but because the decision had. She walked over. Bruno stepped aside just enough to give her room, but stayed close, closer than before. Lydia crouched. She slid the edge of the bar back into the seam between the boards. This time she didn't hesitate. She pressed down. The wood resisted, then shifted. A sharper sound now. Not loud, but clearer. The board lifted slightly at one corner. Lydia adjusted her grip. Pressed again. The edge rose higher. Dust broke loose along the seam, lifting into the air in a thin cloud before settling again. Bruno leaned forward, his nose close but not touching. Watching. Lydia worked the bar slowly along the length of the board. Each movement loosened it more, until finally, it lifted. Just enough for her fingers to slip underneath. She set the bar aside and gripped the edge. Pulled. The board came free with a low, hollow sound. She set it carefully to the side. Beneath it, darkness. Not deep, but enough to hide detail. Lydia paused. Her breath slowed. She reached for the second board. This one came easier. Looser, as if it had been meant to come up alongside the first. She lifted it away, set it down. Now the opening was clear. A narrow cavity beneath the floor, lined with rough wood, deliberate. Bruno exhaled softly beside her. Not tense, not anxious, just settled, like something had been found. Lydia leaned forward. The light from the window didn't reach fully into the space, but it was enough to catch the outline of something inside. A shape. Box-like. Wrapped. She reached in carefully. Her fingers brushed against fabric. Thick. Coated with something that felt stiff and waxed. She pulled gently. The object didn't move at first. Stuck slightly in place. She shifted her grip. Pulled again. This time it slid free. Slowly. The sound of it moving against the wood was soft but distinct. Lydia lifted it out of the cavity and set it on the floor beside her. A metal box. Old. The surface worn and darkened with time, edges slightly rusted, but intact. The oilcloth wrapped around it was tied with a thin cord, the knot still holding. Bruno stepped closer. His head lowered slightly, nose hovering near the edge of the box. Then he stopped. Didn't touch it. Just watched. Lydia sat back on her heels. Her hands rested lightly on her thighs. She stared at the box for a long moment. "What do you think?" she asked quietly. Bruno didn't move, but his tail gave a single, slow sweep against the floor. Lydia reached forward. Her fingers found the cord. It felt brittle. Old. She pulled at the knot carefully. It resisted, then loosened. The cord slipped free. She unwrapped the oilcloth, layer by layer. Each fold releasing a faint smell, metal, time, something preserved, until the box was fully exposed. There was no lock, just a lid. Lydia placed her hand on top of it. Paused. The room felt smaller now, quieter. Even the creak seemed to fade back for a moment. She lifted the lid. It opened without resistance. Inside, not what she expected. Not coins. Not stacks of cash. Just paper. Neatly arranged, bound together in places, loose in others. And something else. Photographs. Lydia blinked once, then leaned closer. Bruno stayed beside her. Still. Calm. As if whatever this was, it was meant to be found. Lydia didn't touch anything at first. She just looked. The papers were arranged in careful stacks, not perfectly aligned, but close enough to show intention. The edges were worn, corners softened with time. Some were tied together with twine that had darkened and stiffened over the years. On top of one stack lay a photograph, black and white. Faded, but still clear enough to make out the shapes. A group of people stood in front of the mill. Not this version of it, not as it looked now, but younger, straighter, with the wheel whole and turning. The people in the photograph wore plain clothes, work clothes, hands at their sides, faces serious, but not unhappy. Lydia picked it up carefully. The paper felt thin, fragile. She tilted it toward the light. There was no writing on the back, just the image. She set it aside and reached for the next item. A ledger, bound in dark cloth, edges frayed. She opened it slowly. The pages inside were filled with handwriting, tight, neat lines running across each page. Names, dates, numbers. She traced one entry with her finger. Thomas Bell, 3 bushels corn. Below it, paid. Another name, Evelyn Harper, 2 bushels wheat. Beside it, a line drawn through the amount, and a note in smaller writing. Settled in winter, no charge. Lydia paused. She turned the page. More names, more entries. Some marked paid, others not. But instead of being left open, they were crossed out, forgiven. The pattern repeated over and over. She leaned back slightly. This wasn't just records, she said under her breath. Bruno shifted beside her, lowering himself to the floor with a soft exhale. His body relaxed now, not fully asleep, but no longer alert in the same way. The tension that had held him at the floorboards was gone. His job, whatever it had been, was finished. Lydia turned another page. The dates stretched back. Years. Decades. The handwriting remained steady throughout. Consistent. Whoever kept this book had done it for a long time. She closed it gently and set it aside. Beneath it lay a bundle of letters. Folded. Some sealed. Others already opened. The paper had yellowed, but the ink remained. She picked one at random and unfolded it. The creases resisted at first, then gave. Inside, the writing was softer, less structured. Mr. Presley, I know I owe for the last delivery. I'll have it after the harvest, I promise. My youngest has been sick, and we've had to use what we had stored. Thank you for your patience. No signature at the bottom, just initials. Lydia read it once more, then placed it carefully back. She picked up another. Different handwriting. Shorter. Couldn't have made it through January without your help. I'll remember it. She didn't open more. Didn't need to. The pattern was already clear. This place. It hadn't been run like a business. Not in the way she understood one. She reached deeper into the box. At the bottom, beneath the papers and photographs, lay a single folded sheet. Thicker than the others. The edges still crisp. Protected. She hesitated before unfolding it. Something about it felt final. Like it had been placed there last. She opened it carefully. The handwriting matched the ledger. Steady. Deliberate. My name is Samuel Presley. I have kept this mill running for most of my life, as my father did before me. What passes through here is more than grain. It is what keeps people going when seasons turn hard. There were times when I charged what I should, and times when I did not. A man remembers which is which. If you have found this place, then you have found what remains of that work. The wheel may stop, the walls may fall, but what mattered was never the building. It was what it allowed. If you can keep it standing, do so, not for profit, not for pride, but because some things are meant to serve more than themselves. Lydia read it twice, then a third time. Her hands stayed steady, but something deeper shifted. Not sharply, not suddenly, just moved. She folded the paper again, slower this time, and placed it back on top of the others. The box didn't feel like a discovery anymore. It felt like something handed over. She sat there for a long moment. The light through the window had shifted again, angling differently across the floor, catching the edges of the open cavity and the boards stacked beside it. The room felt quieter now. Not empty, not watchful. Just settled. Bruno rested his head on his paws. His eyes followed her movements, but there was no urgency left in them. Only calm. You knew it was here, she said softly. He didn't react, but his tail moved once against the floor. Lydia looked back at the box, at the ledger, at the photographs of people she would never know, and the names. So many names. Each one written carefully, each one remembered. She reached out and closed the lid. The sound was soft. Final. She wrapped the oilcloth back around it, not as tightly as before, but enough to protect it. Then she slid the box a little closer to the wall. Not hidden. Just placed. The opening in the floor remained. Boards set aside. A space revealed. Lydia stood slowly. Her legs protested again, but she didn't mind this time. She walked to the window, looked out. The forest stood the same as before, unchanged. The creek moved steadily beneath the mill, unconcerned with what had been found above it. She rested her hand lightly on the frame. "This place fed people," she said quietly. The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. Behind her, Bruno shifted once, then settled again. And for the first time since she had stepped into the mill, she understood what she was standing in. Not just a structure, not just a place to stay. Something else. Something that had been waiting. Lydia stood there a long time, her hand resting against the window frame, the wood cool and worn beneath her fingers. The forest outside didn't react. No shift in the trees, no sudden movement, just the same quiet presence it had always held. But inside the mill, everything felt different. Not brighter, not warmer, just clearer. She turned back into the room. The open space in the floor remained, boards set aside, the cavity no longer hidden. The metal box now rested near the wall, wrapped again, but not buried, not forgotten. Bruno watched her from where he lay, his head lifting slightly as she moved. "What now?" she asked softly. It wasn't really a question for him, but he answered anyway. He stood, stretched once, then walked toward the stairs. Not toward the fireplace, not toward the floor, toward the rest of the mill. Lydia followed. The lower level felt less foreign now. The same stone walls, the same cold air, but something in her posture had changed as she stepped down. She wasn't looking for a way out anymore. She was looking around. The broken mechanism in the center of the room drew her attention first. What had seemed like debris before now looked structured, pieces that had once fit together. Wooden arms, iron joints, worn smooth in places where they had turned again and again. She moved closer, ran her hand along one of the beams. Dust lifted beneath her touch. "This worked," she said quietly. Bruno circled the room once, slower now. No urgency, no scanning, just moving. He stopped near the door, looking out, then back at her. Waiting. Lydia glanced toward the entrance. The light outside had shifted again. Later now, the shadows longer. She stepped outside. The air hit her differently this time. Colder, yes, but cleaner. The creek ran just beneath the structure, the sound louder here where it emerged again from under the stone. She stepped closer to the edge, looked down. The water moved steadily over rock, clear enough to see the bottom even in the fading light. She crouched slightly, resting one hand against the stone wall for balance. "You're not stopping," she said, almost to herself. The creek didn't answer. It didn't need to. Behind her, Bruno stood at the doorway. Not stepping out. Not stepping in. Just there. Present. Lydia straightened and turned back. The rest of the afternoon passed without urgency. She moved through the space slowly, not cleaning yet, not fixing, just understanding where things were, what still held, what didn't. She tested the table upstairs again, shifted it slightly until it stood more evenly, moved the chair closer to the wall, stacked her bins in a corner where they wouldn't be in the way. Simple things, small changes, but they stayed. Every time she placed something down, it remained exactly where she left it. No one moved it. No one questioned it. No one told her it didn't belong there. Bruno followed her at times. Other times, he chose his own place. Near the door, near the stairs, near the wall where he could see both the entrance and the room. Always aware, but no longer tense. As the light faded, Lydia gathered a few loose boards from the lower level, dry enough, usable. She carried them upstairs, one at a time, her steps slower now but steady. At the fireplace, she cleared out the hardened ash with a piece of broken wood, pushing it aside carefully. It took time. More than she expected, but she didn't rush it. When the space was clear enough, she arranged the boards. Struck a match. It took 2 tries. The first flickered out. The second caught. A small flame. Then another. The fire built slowly. The light it gave off was soft at first, barely touching the edges of the room. But as it grew, it pushed back the dimness, filling the space with a warm, steady glow. Lydia sat back, watched it. Bruno moved closer. Not too close, just enough to feel the heat. He lowered himself to the floor, letting out a quiet breath as he settled. The room changed again, not just in light, in feeling. The cold pulled back. The shadows softened. The sound of the creek blended with the crackle of the fire, creating something steady, something balanced. Lydia rested her hands on her knees. "This will take time," she said. Her voice was quiet, but sure. She looked around the room. The walls, the floor, the place where the boards had been lifted, the box near the wall. Nothing about it was finished. Nothing about it was easy. But it wasn't impossible either. She leaned back slightly, letting the warmth reach her. Outside, the forest darkened. Inside, the fire held. Bruno shifted once, then laid his head down, eyes still half open. Watching, but not guarding. Not like before. Lydia closed her eyes for a moment. Not to sleep, just to feel it. The stillness, the warmth, the absence of noise that wasn't hers. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't waiting for something to change. She was already inside it. Morning came softer than before. Not because the forest was quieter, but because she didn't wake to noise she couldn't place. No engines, no footsteps outside a thin door, no voices bleeding through walls that weren't hers. Just light. Faint at first, then slowly filling the room, spreading across the floorboards, touching the edges of the table, the chair, the place near the fireplace where the boards had once been hidden. Lydia opened her eyes. The fire had burned down to a low bed of coals, still holding heat. Bruno was already awake. He stood near the doorway, looking out. Not tense, not rigid, just watching. She pushed herself up slowly. Her back still ached, her hands still stiff, but the movement felt easier. Familiar. She stepped across the room, her bare feet finding the uneven places in the floor without needing to look. The boards she had lifted were still set aside. The opening remained, uncovered, unhidden. She paused beside it, looked down. The space beneath was empty now. Not because there had never been anything there, but because what had been hidden had already been brought into the light. She turned. The metal box sat where she had placed it, not tucked away, not buried again, just present. She walked over and rested her hand on it. Didn't open it. Didn't need to. Some things didn't have to be read twice to stay with you. Behind her, Bruno stepped away from the door and moved toward her. His tail moved once, slow, easy. He didn't go back to the fireplace, didn't return to the floor. That part was finished. Lydia looked around the room. The table stood where she had adjusted it. The chair didn't wobble anymore. Her bins were stacked neatly along the wall. The blanket still lay where she had spread it. Nothing had shifted overnight. Nothing had been disturbed. It all stayed. She walked to the window. The forest outside held its shape, the same as yesterday, but clearer now in the morning light. The creek moved beneath the mill, steady as ever, catching the sunlight in brief flashes where it broke through the trees. She rested her hand against the frame again. It felt the same, but she didn't. Behind her, Bruno moved to the doorway once more, then sat. Not blocking it, not guarding it, just sitting there, facing outward. Present. Lydia stepped away from the window and moved slowly around the room. Not inspecting, not searching, just being there. She picked up one of the boards she had removed and leaned it carefully against the wall, then the other. She didn't cover the opening yet. Not right away. She let it remain. A reminder. Of what had been there. Of what had been found. Of what didn't need to be hidden anymore. She moved to the stairs and descended. The lower level felt quieter in the morning. Cooler, but not unwelcoming. She stepped into the center of the room, looking at the old mechanism again. The wood. The iron. The structure that had once moved, once turned, once done something useful. She placed her hand against one of the beams. It didn't move. Not yet. But it didn't feel dead either. Just waiting. Like everything else had been. She stepped back, then turned and walked outside. The air was crisp, cool enough to make her breath visible for a moment before it faded. The ground was damp beneath her feet. The creek louder here, its rhythm unchanged from the day before. Lydia walked a few steps along its edge. Careful. Balanced. She crouched again, this time letting her fingers touch the surface of the water. Cold. Clear. It moved around her hand without resistance. She pulled it back slowly, watched the droplets fall. Behind her, Bruno stepped out into the light. He stretched once, then moved to stand beside her. Not in front. Not ahead. Beside. Lydia straightened, looked out over the narrow stretch of water, the trees rising on both sides, the path they had taken now hidden behind distance and leaves. There was no road here. No sign. Nothing marking the place except what it was. She turned back toward the mill. It didn't look better in the daylight. Not really. Still leaning, still worn, still imperfect. But it stood. That was enough. For now. She walked back inside. Up the stairs. Into the room that no longer felt borrowed. Bruno followed, his steps steady, his presence quiet. He moved to his place near the doorway and lay down. Head up. Eyes soft. Lydia crossed to the window once more. The light filled the space more fully now, settling into the corners, resting against the walls. She stood there for a long moment, then nodded, almost to herself. What she had lost hadn't followed her here. Not the silence that pressed in, not the feeling of being watched without being seen, not the weight of waiting for someone else to decide where she belonged. That had stayed behind, locked, left where it had been. Here, there was something else, not given, not taken. Something she had stepped into, chosen, built already in the smallest ways. A board lifted, a fire started, a space made. She turned from the window, the room held steady. Nothing shifting, nothing uncertain. Bruno let out a slow breath and lowered his head to his paws. The creek moved beneath them, the light held. And for the first time in a long while, Lydia didn't feel like she had been pushed out of something. She felt like she had arrived. The room didn't ask anything from her. No voices, no expectations, no one deciding if she belonged there or not. Just the quiet weight of the floor beneath her feet, the same floor Bruno had refused to leave alone.
He had known not what a hidden exactly, but that something was up. Something didn't match the rest of the room, and instead of walking past it, he stayed, patient, certain, waiting for her to see it too. Lydia looked down at the place where the boards had been lifted. On those years, she had learned to ignore things, to stay quiet, to step around what didn't feel right because it was easier that way. But here, the one thing she didn't ignore changed everything. She glanced to Bruno. He didn't look back at her, just rested there, calm, like he always had been, never trying to lead, only refusing to let her miss what mattered. The brick moved beneath them, steady, unconscious with who stayed or who left, and Lydia stood there in a place no one wanted, holding on to something that had been waiting longer than he had. Not for just anyone, but for someone who would finally stop and notice. And it makes you wonder how many things in your own life have been quietly waiting like that for you to stop walking past them.